Mayday! 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 August 24th, 2001. The middle of the night. Somewhere over the vast Atlantic Ocean, an Airbus A330 glides through the sky. But this is no ordinary flight. On board are 306 people, unaware that the plane they're sitting in is running on empty. No fuel. No engines. No way to turn back. Only 75 miles of gliding space, and a cold, black ocean below. This is not fiction. This is the real story of Flight 236. Air Transat Flight 236 was meant to be just another routine transatlantic flight, a long-haul journey from Toronto, Canada, to Lisbon, Portugal. On board the Airbus A330-243, tail number CGITS, were 306 people, including passengers and crew. A modern, twin-engine wide-body jet, renowned as one of the safest and most reliable aircraft in commercial aviation, was scheduled to depart Toronto at 8:52 p.m. It was loaded with approximately 46.9 metric tons of fuel, about 5.5 tons more than the legal minimum required for the journey. That extra fuel, added as a standard precaution, would later become a deciding factor between life and death. The route from Toronto to Lisbon stretches across the vast and remote Atlantic Ocean. The journey takes about 7 hours, most of it flying over open water with no easy access to emergency landing sites. For much of the trip, the nearest runways are thousands of miles away. If anything were to go seriously wrong in the middle of the ocean, the pilots would have very few options, and very little time. In the cockpit sat Captain Robert Pish, 48 years old, a highly experienced pilot with over 16,000 flight hours. Beside him was First Officer Dirk de Jager, just 28, younger but skilled, with more than 4,800 hours in the skies. Together, they made a confident and competent flight crew. In the cabin were 293 passengers, many of them Portuguese nationals heading home or setting off on vacation. Families with children. Elderly couples. A pair of newlyweds. The mood was relaxed. The flight felt routine. Normal. But beneath that calm surface, something was already going wrong. A silent threat was building, one that no one on board, not even the seasoned pilots up front, could yet detect. Days before the flight, during routine maintenance in Montreal, metal chips were discovered in the oil filter of one engine, a serious warning sign of possible engine trouble. Unable to identify the source of the chips, the maintenance crew decided to replace the engine entirely. After completing the work, thorough inspections and testing were conducted, all showing normal function. The aircraft was then approved for flight. However, during the engine replacement process, a crucial mistake occurred. A hydraulic component, not designed for use in the fuel system, was mistakenly installed in place of the proper fuel line part. Although it physically fit, it wasn't a perfect match and wasn't built to handle fuel. And during the long flight, that mistake would come back to haunt them. The first hours of the flight were smooth and uneventful. But several hours in, while the plane was about halfway across the vast Atlantic Ocean, something unusual happened. A warning light illuminated in the cockpit. Low oil temperature and high oil pressure in the left engine. At the time, it seemed like a minor sensor glitch. But behind that flickering light was the first visible symptom of a much deeper problem, one that had quietly taken root days before. Unbeknownst to the crew, fuel was already seeping from the left engine's manifold. And due to the configuration of the fuel cross-feed valve, the system began drawing fuel from both tanks to feed the leaking side, draining the aircraft's supply at an alarming rate. It was a silent killer. No alarms. No flashing lights. Just fuel vanishing. At this stage, the crew still had no idea they were losing fuel, and fast. The aircraft systems weren't showing any low fuel warnings. The onboard computer was being misled by incorrect sensor readings caused by the growing imbalance. Then came a second anomaly, a fuel imbalance warning between the left and right tanks. Acting by the book, the pilots opened the cross-feed valve to correct it, allowing fuel from both tanks to flow evenly. But unknowingly, this action only deepened the crisis. Now, both tanks were feeding the leak. What had been a slow bleed turned into a flood. Fuel was disappearing at an alarming, uncontrollable rate. The aircraft was still more than an hour from land, cruising high above the Atlantic at 39,000 feet. That's when the pilots contacted Santa Maria Oceanic Air Traffic Control, requesting an immediate diversion. They knew something was seriously wrong. The nearest possible runway was Lodge's Air Base, a military airfield on the island of Terceira in the Azores, still 75 miles away across open ocean. Then, at 6:13 Universal Time Coordinated, the right engine suddenly flamed out. Fuel starvation. A worst-case scenario, but it got worse. Moments later, the left engine also failed. Silence. Both engines were dead. Total power loss. The Airbus A330, a 230-ton aircraft, was now nothing more than an enormous glider, drifting above the ocean with 306 souls aboard. Commercial jets aren't designed to fly without engines. But Captain Pish wasn't just a commercial pilot. He was a former bush pilot, experienced in flying powerless aircraft through harsh and unforgiving environments. That experience was about to be tested to its limit. With both engines gone, almost all electrical and hydraulic systems on the plane were lost. But there was one last lifeline, a device called the Ram Air Turbine, or RAT. It's a small propeller that deploys automatically into the airstream during a total power loss, generating just enough power to keep the aircraft's most essential systems alive: flight controls, some instruments, and limited hydraulics. Now in a controlled descent, Pish and First Officer de Jager had to make razor-sharp calculations. They were gliding at a descent rate of roughly 2,000 feet per minute, and they needed to stretch every nautical mile of altitude to make it to Lodges. In the cabin, passengers sensed the change. The sound of the engines was gone. A quiet, unsettling stillness filled the aircraft. But few understood what had just happened. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, calming fears and preparing for a possible ocean ditching. Up in the cockpit, the pilots were focused. They were flying a 230-ton airplane with no engine power. They were gliding through the sky like a giant paper plane, with no second chances. Then, in the distance, they saw it, Lodge's Air Base, a small runway on an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was the only place they could land. But the plane was coming in too high and too fast. To fix it, they used a rare move called a sideslip, turning the plane sideways slightly to slow it down and lose altitude quickly. It's risky and almost never used on big jets, but it was their only chance. The landing gear dropped, powered by gravity since the engines were dead. They didn't have full control of the flaps, either, which made slowing down even harder. Then, they hit the runway. Hard. Tires burst. Brakes smoked. The plane shook as it sped down the runway. And then, it stopped. Just 850 feet before the end of the runway. They had done it. Everyone survived. All 306 passengers and crew walked away. Some were hospitalized for minor injuries. But there were no fatalities. The investigation revealed the error, a faulty hydraulic part used instead of a fuel line component. Air Transat was fined. Procedures changed. But Captain Pish and F.O. de Jager were hailed as heroes. The flight is still considered one of the greatest feats of airmanship in modern aviation. Flight 236 is more than a story of survival. It's a reminder of how fast things can go wrong, and how training, skill, and calm under pressure can save hundreds of lives. Every time you fly, you place your trust in people you may never meet. On that August night, 306 people put their lives in the hands of 2 pilots, and those pilots delivered a miracle.